Hey guys, my name is Nicole. Welcome back to my channel. Let me show you what we're working on today. Today I'm going to be making two signs for my antique booth, Green Onion Vintage. I'm going to be selling these for Christmas time. Sometimes when my booth looks a little lackluster, I realize I just need to add in some more like modern elements, and normally a handmade sign will do that for me. I've made a lot of signs in this similar style, but I'm going to be making my own stencil today with my Cricut and doing two signs. These blanks are from Home Depot, and I'll give you a close-up here. So they're 2 feet by 2 feet. They're 1/4 inch thick, just MDF. I feel like they're around $10 each, but I know the prices have gone up since I purchased these. So they're probably going to vary based on your store, but I do get these in the Home Depot lumber section. I'm going to paint one white, one black, and then use the same stencil to paint them kind of in inverted colors. And then I will be framing them up and they'll be all ready to go. So my design idea for these signs is to have a large Christmas tree in the background, and I'm just going to be painting that kind of a mixture of greens, and then the words "We wish you a Merry Christmas" in the foreground. And for the white sign I'll be using black font, and for the black sign I'll be using white font and making that look more like a faux chalkboard, which is one of my favorite techniques to do. So I'm just using my Cricut here. You see that I had to go through quite a few fonts to figure out which one I wanted to use. And since I'm using a cardstock stencil, what you see me doing right now is making some bars through the letters that have connectors so that the insides don't fall through of my stencil. So when I have the bars cross the font, I can actually slice out that section so that my Cricut will go into the letter and cut that out, but it'll still have a little piece, that little line basically, that'll still connect it to the rest of the stencil. That's the best way I've found to do it. There are probably other ways, but that has worked for me. Now what I'm doing is copying and pasting my design and then cutting out the design into two different pieces so that they fit onto my mat. I am making a sign that is larger than the mat, so I have to kind of piece it together this way. So now "We wish you a Merry" will cut on one, Christmas will cut on another, and then the tree will cut on its own. And I'm using cardstock for all three sections. So the way I use cardstock, I just lay it right onto my cutting mat. This is a thinner cardstock than I like to use. I like to use a heavyweight cardstock, and I can get more uses out of it. This thinner paper, I think I got it on sale and didn't really pay attention to the fact that it was a little bit of a thinner cardstock, but it doesn't last me more than two stencils basically. Once it gets painted, the edges start to curl up and stuff, and it's just not a great long-term stencil. But the thicker cardstock really does hold up well, and I can normally get several signs out of it. So when I'm using cardstock, I just put a piece of Scotch tape over the seam of the two pages, and the Cricut will cut right through that. So that's actually been something that works really well for me. And here I have it cut down because this is the mat that's just going to have the word Christmas cut out. So I'm just using basically some scrap cardstock at this point, and trying to do this as budget friendly as possible. And this is definitely the quickest way I've found to make stencils. I know a lot of people use vinyl for their stencils, and I just find it really kind of tricky to work with. And I prefer that the cardstock, I can move it around on my sign. I can really figure out the best placement. And so this is just my preferred way to do it. There are other ways to do it for sure, but this is just the way that I choose most often. So right now this is my Maker 3. It is cutting out my stencil. You can see there that it just cuts right through that cardstock, no problem. The Maker 3 is definitely a more powerful machine than my old, what are they called? Explorer Air 2, my Cricut Explorer Air 2. So I've only had this one for a couple months. It's definitely really powerful, and it cuts really quickly. Now I'm moving on to the larger section of the sign that says "We wish you a Merry," and that all fit on one mat. And now I basically just have to weed out the parts of my stencil that I don't need, and then I will tape my cardstock together to make this larger than a mat sign stencil, which I've done this method 100 times probably now. I mean, it is a little tedious, but it works out well for me. I did keep making some like constant mistakes. I do want to mention here, I actually flip it over and let the mat curl up. That's a good way to keep your paper nice and flat, because if you try to curl off your paper from the mat, sometimes that can make your stencil not lay flat anymore. So I tend to flip it over if I'm having a hard time getting it to release from the mat, and pull it off that way. But this side actually did fine just pulling it off from the front. And I forgot to do a connector right there for the Y. So I'm using a piece of Scotch tape to connect that inside of the Y loop. Otherwise it would just stick on my mat and my stencil would be incomplete. I feel like that's confusing to explain until you have tried to make a stencil and you realize that you need those little bars. See, you can see the lines a little bit that I use to connect those inside pieces. And that is from where I used the lines on the Cricut Design Space and overlaid them and cut those pieces out. If you want a more detailed tutorial on that, I could probably make like a quick couple minute video just to explain that part for you. So now I'm connecting my stencil with some Scotch tape. And once my stencils are all cut out and ready to go and they're all taped together, I'm finally ready to start painting. So this can be another tedious part, and just making sure that you have everything lined up. But I use my square ruler here all the time for my sign making. I definitely recommend having that in your craft room if you don't already. And then I just use painter's tape to attach my stencil down onto my sign. I've never really had any problem with painter's tape pulling up my paint. It's nice and gentle like that, and that's kind of what it's designed for. So I do recommend using painter's tape. And once I kind of have my placement figured out and it taped down, I'm ready to paint. I'm using Waverly paint today, not Dixie Belle. Well, I guess I'm using both actually, so I shouldn't say I'm not. But I'm using the Waverly paint in Fern and then in Mineral, and I'm kind of using a paper plate basically as my palette here to mix those colors together as I go. Try to get like a variation of green as I'm painting and not let it just be a flat color. I'm using a makeup sponge because I found that is the best method to not let the paint run underneath your stencil. And I actually use a little too much pressure on this one, and it does actually bleed a little bit. I haven't done a stencil, I guess, on a flat board like this in a while. So the edges were a little bit more bleedy than I would like them to be. So just have a lighter touch would be my best suggestion there. You never want to use a ton of paint. I have a very thin amount of paint on my sponge, and then nice and light pressure and just dabbing up and down. You don't want to like rub paint underneath your stencil. You want to have a lot of up and down motion. And I found that gives me a nice, really clean line in the end. I'm doing the same kind of color combos on the chalkboard sign. I'm trying to make this one a little bit thinner in places and thicker in other spots, which would be like a little bit more how real chalk would look on a chalkboard. It's kind of the effect I'm going for. And then once I have it fully covered, I do go back on this one and put in some kind of horizontal lines to make it look more realistic and just give it a little bit more visual interest here. So I'm just using mixtures of that green and mineral paint, and I think it turned out really pretty. There's no real right or wrong way to do this. These are the kind of projects I like to share where you can really get creative with this. You could do different colors of trees if you wanted. I just kind of kept things simple for this time around. And you can pull up your stencil right away as soon as you're done. And that's how it looked. I thought the trees came out really nice. And then once I let that dry all the way, I was ready to do my words. And I do the exact same stenciling method here. I'm using the makeup sponges and just a very light coat of paint on my sponge. I use a tiny bit of paint at a time. And I'm just dabbing up and down with very light pressure. It is time consuming, it is tedious, but it works for me almost every single time. So I definitely recommend this way. I know a lot of people watch these videos and they say like I can never do clean lines like that, but I'm telling you, this is all I do. There's no secret. It's really just taking your time. And I know it takes a while and my shoulder's always like killing me by the end, but it's worth it to get a nice clean line in the end. And it's so much better than having to like go back and touch up your paint. So take your time now so that you don't have to take time later fixing wherever your stencil bleeds. Now I do have to go back through at this point and paint over all those little lines that I used to connect the inside of the letters. I just use a very, very tiny detail artist brush and just a little bit of paint and fill those lines in. This is also tedious, but definitely worth it to not leave those lines in there. And just, if you've ever wondered how much or why handmade signs cost so much if you go to a vintage market or something, this is why. I mean, they tend to look simple, but the more simple a sign is, actually, there was very likely more detail work done than you realize. So let that just be known to you that that's probably why they charge what they charge, because it's a lot of work. And then I did the exact same method for the white sign, just using black paint instead. That one came out really nice too. Now I'm ready to move on to working on the frame. So I just use these very thin strips of poplar from Home Depot. I cut them down. So my sign is 24 inches. I made these 26 inches. So there's about an inch of overhang on each side. And I'm just putting a frame board on the tops and bottoms of the sign as if it was like a poster hanging. And then I'll attach a rope to the back to kind of hang as a triangle at the top so that these can hang on the wall. I just glue the frame boards right onto the sign using some Gorilla Glue. They're nice and sturdy that way. I haven't had any problems with them breaking off or pulling off. The Gorilla Glue is really, really strong. So I just try to clamp them and set a weight on that overnight, and they are really good to go. And I just use kind of a craft rope that I found, I think, at Hobby Lobby. And I just measure 2 inches over and 1 inch down. I use my staple gun to attach the rope. And that's the final part of this process for the white sign. It's all ready to go at this point. Really simple, like I said, nice and budget friendly despite the lumber costs rising. I feel like one of my favorite things to do is to be able to go to Home Depot and just get some blank boards and then turn them into art for your home. I just love the whole process. Despite it being tedious, I really do love a good before and after. So here's how the white sign turned out. I kind of hung it up there with a little wreath above it. I thought that was really pretty. I like how just simple and modern this is. And then for the black sign, I wanted to give like a faux rubbed chalk effect. So I'm clear waxing it first to kind of give it a protective coating. And that's also going to let me apply some white wax on top and be able to move that white wax around a lot. If I just went and did the white wax without doing the clear wax first, the white was going to be really difficult to work with and probably thicker than I wanted it to be. So by clear waxing and then white waxing, I was able to give this really beautiful faux chalkboard finish. I love how they both turned out so much. I'll probably sell them for $40 in my antique booth, which is actually a little lower than I normally do. But tomorrow is Small Business Saturday, and I want to make sure I have these in my booth for that day. And I like to have some things in there that are a little bit cheaper than my normal price point. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Let me know which one's your favorite down in the comments. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving and are looking forward to this Christmas season. Please subscribe if you haven't yet. I'd love for you guys to join me over here, and then also join my Facebook creative community group if you haven't done that yet. And I will look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks so much. Bye.